The star system had been dead for centuries, its suns shattered by wars long forgotten, its planets reduced to dust and stone. Yet in the endless dark, new wars were born. Wreckage drifted in the void, twisted metal turning slowly in the weightless silence. Into this graveyard came fire once more. The human fleet surged from one side, engines burning bright against the shadow of broken worlds. On the other, the Sarati Dominion cut through space like a knife, their angular ships carrying the weight of old grudges. Lasers lit the void. Missiles carved glowing trails. It was less a battle than a storm, and caught inside that storm were two lives whose paths were about to change forever. Captain Elias Ward gripped the edge of his console as his cruiser shuddered under a fresh impact. Sparks showered the bridge. The ship's AI screamed warnings into his ears. Years of war had stripped him of illusions, but not of duty. He barked orders, trying to hold the line, even as he felt the hull beneath his boots groaning like a dying beast. His brother's face still lived in his memory, lost to this war years ago. Each time the Sarati appeared in his scope, Elias felt the echo of that grief sharpen into resolve. He would not falter. Across the chaos, Commander Cerise Kale stood, in the command chamber of her Sarati warship. Tall, elegant, in her armored skin suit, she radiated control that her crew both feared and revered. To them she was cold steel, wrapped in flesh, a strategist who never hesitated, never doubted. Yet inside, there was a hollow place carved by the endless cycles of blood. She told herself the humans were nothing more than vermin, consuming the stars. Yet when she closed her eyes, she sometimes wondered if they felt the same exhaustion she did. The two ships met, in fire. Elias' cruisers slammed broadside against Cirrus' vessel, both bleeding metal. The impact crippled them, dragging them toward the orbit of a nearby moon scarred with craters and storms. Sirens filled the air. Elias gave the order no captain ever wanted to speak. Abandoned ship. He strapped himself into the last escape pod, flames licking at the bay doors as it launched into blackness. Cerise, too, was torn from command. Her vessel's heart ruptured in a burst of molten fire, forcing her into a sleek Sarati pod. Alone, she was hurled from the wreck of her ship toward the same moon that pulled Elias down. Neither knew that fate had chosen a cruel symmetry for them both. The moon's atmosphere clawed at their descent. Elias fought the controls, teeth gritted, as his pod screamed through clouds thick with ash. Cirrus' pod, guided by alien precision, landed hard on a jagged ridge of stone. Both crawled from wreckage into a wasteland of dust, acid winds biting the air, lightning crawling along the sky's broken veins. Elias staggered forward, clutching the knife that had hung on his belt since his cadet days. His eyes narrowed as he caught movement across the rocks. A tall figure, scales glinting faintly beneath armor, curved blade in hand. Cerise Kale, their gazes locked. For a breath, silence filled the storm. Then steel sang. She moved first, her blade slashing with practiced speed. He ducked low, driving forward with raw human ferocity, their weapons clashing, sparks flying. They circled, predators bound by hate, the storm's lightning casting them. In flashes of gold and shadow, she hissed in her native tongue, words dripping venom. He answered with a growl of his own, in human speech, but no less sharp. Neither understood, yet both knew the meaning. Enemy. The fight could have ended in blood. Perhaps it should have. But the ground trembled beneath them, a quake splitting the ridge. Rocks tumbled, acid rain beginning to hiss against the stone. Both stumbled back, weapons still raised, realizing that the moon itself wanted them dead. More than either of them did. Breathing hard, Elias adjusted his grip. Cerise tilted her blade, but did not lunge. The storm's howl drowned out their thoughts. In the end, it was survival that forced their decision. With a slow, deliberate motion, Elias lowered his knife just an inch. Cerise's golden eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. Then reluctantly she eased her stance. The ceasefire was uneasy, fragile as glass. They did not speak, not in words. But in that moment, soaked in rain and lit by fire from the wreckage, a silent pact was forged. They would not kill each other. Not yet. Survival demanded more than hate, and so, in the ruins of a dead system, beneath a storm-torn sky, two enemies walked side by side into the unknown, still carrying their blades, still carrying their fury, but bound by a fate neither of them could yet see. The storm did not ease as night fell over the broken moon. It deepened. Acid rain struck the rocks in sizzling bursts, filling the air with a choking mist. Elias Ward trudged forward, each step sinking into ash-soft soil, his knife gripped tight. Beside him, though never close, walked Cerise Cale. Her alien frame moved with coiled grace, the curved blade in her hand gleaming whenever lightning ripped across the sky. Neither trusted the other, and yet neither dared separate. Alone, the storm would finish what the battle had begun. They found shelter in the maw of a collapsed cavern. The stone twisted as though ancient fire had melted it. Elias set down the emergency light he salvaged from his pod, its glow faint but warm in the darkness. Cerise stood at the edge of the glow, eyes sharp, her blade never lowered. The cavern smelled of minerals and rot, the wind howling through cracks like the voices of ghosts. For a long while, silence was all that lived between them. Elias broke it first. "The storm will last till dawn." His voice was low, measured. He didn't expect her to understand his words. Still, speaking anchored him. To his surprise, she answered. The tone was guttural, the Sarati tongue edged with steel, yet her meaning was clear enough through tone and gesture. "Then we stay. Fight later." Her words struck him with a strange relief. There was no warmth in them, but there was honesty. He nodded. And so, the night began. Suspense thickened in the cavern. Elias tried to rest against the stone, knife within reach, eyes half-lidded, but never closed. Ceres crouched opposite him, her gaze steady, like a predator keeping watch over prey. Yet as hours dragged on, fatigue wrapped them both in silence. The turning point came when the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that was not storm or stone. A clicking, metallic rhythm echoed through the cavern, faint at first but growing. Nearer. Elias sat up sharply. Ceres' head snapped toward the sound, blade flashing into guard position. From the shadows, shapes emerged. Not animal, not alive. Machines, ancient war drones. Their limbs rusted but deadly, their eyes glowing with a dim pulsing red. Relics of some long-forgotten conflict, still hunting, still obeying orders carved into them by masters who had turned to dust ages ago. Elias surged forward with a roar, knife striking sparks against metal. Ceres lunged beside him, her blade slicing clean through a drone's neck, sparks raining in the dark. For the first time, they fought as one, not allies, not yet, but two warriors bound by survival. He ducked beneath a drone's swing and felt her curved blade pass over his head, severing the attacker in a blur of speed. She took a strike meant for his spine, her armor sparking but holding. He covered her flank, shoving his knife deep into a drone's joint until it collapsed. The battle was brutal but short. When the last drone fell, twitching and sparking on the ground, the cavern returned to silence, save for their heavy breaths. Elias turned toward her, chest heaving. She met his gaze. For a heartbeat, there was no hate, only the strange, jarring realization that they had just saved each other's lives. Ceres lowered her blade first this time. She touched her side, where sparks had burned through her armor, wincing. Elias hesitated, then reached into his pack, pulling out a canteen. He held it toward her, not speaking. She stared at it, suspicion in her golden eyes. Slowly, she extended a clawed hand, took the canteen, and drank. Her throat moved as the water slid down, her expression unreadable. She handed it back without a word. But the silence now felt different, less sharp, less cold. As the storm outside softened to a dull roar, They sat across from each other, firelight flickering from a piece of burning drone scrap. Elias studied her in secret. The strange elegance of her scaled skin, the hardness in her eyes that seemed carved by endless battles. She, in turn, regarded him with quiet curiosity, as though she saw in him something she had not expected. Neither spoke again that night. But when Elias finally allowed sleep to take him, his knife was still near it. For the first time, he didn't grip it tight, and when Cerise shifted in the darkness, she did not move to strike. She simply sat, watching him, her blade lowered, across her knees, her thoughts tangled in ways even she could not understand. The storm was not the only thing that had changed that night. The first fracture in hatred had been carved, and in the silence that followed, something unfamiliar began to breathe between them. The storm outside the cavern had quieted, but the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Ash still drifted through the cracks in the rock like falling snow, and every gust carried the bitter temps of acid. Elias woke first, blinking into the faint light of his dying lamp. His muscles ached, his throat dry, but his knife was still in reach. Across the cavern, Cirrus Kale was already awake. She hadn't slept. He realized that quickly. She sat perfectly still, her golden eyes fixed on him in a way that felt more like calculation than hostility. Elias shifted to sit upright. The knife was in his hand before he even thought about it. Cerise didn't move, though her curved blade gleamed faintly in the firelight. It was a silent exchange, one they had repeated since the crash. You breathe, I breathe, but only because survival demands it. Then the ground trembled. It was subtle at first, a vibration through the stone, but it grew until dust rained down from the cavern roof. Both rose instantly, weapons drawn. The quakes pulsed like a heartbeat beneath their feet. From deeper inside the ruins, a low mechanical hum began to stir. The sound was wrong, too steady, too alive for a dead moon. Elias glanced at Cerise, who seemed just as unsettled. Without speaking, they moved together, deeper into the cavern, guided by the strange glow of faint lights pulsing within the stone. The cavern widened into a chamber that defied nature. Metallic walls, curved in impossible symmetry, lined with faintly glowing runes, older than any language Ilias had ever studied. At the center stood a monolithic structure, humming softly, its surface fractured, yet still alive with energy. Cirrus froze. He saw the flicker in her expression, recognition, or perhaps fear. She whispered something in her tongue, low and almost. Reverend Elias stepped closer, his hand brushing the surface of the monolith. At his touch, the chamber came alive. Light flooded the walls, the hum swelling into a voice without words, a resonance that vibrated in his bones. He stumbled back, knife ready. Though it felt useless against something like this, Cerise joined him at the center, her gaze locked on the monolith. She extended her hand, touching the surface with her clawed fingers. The hum changed instantly. Two tones, now one for him, one for her, intertwining. The realization struck Elias with chilling clarity. This thing was listening. Not to him alone, not to her alone, to them both. A sudden screech echoed through the cavern, breaking the trance. From the shadows of the chamber's edges came movement, more of the ancient war drones. Larger this time, their frames scarred but functional. Their red eyes glowed brighter than those of the drones before. Elias lunged, knife flashing, slashing at the first machine that charged. Its clawed arm caught his shoulder, tearing cloth and skin, but he drove his blade deep into its joint, until sparks rained down. Cerise whirled beside him, her blade slicing through a drone's head in one clean arc. The battle was frantic. The drones were relentless, their movements sharper than the ones they had fought the night before. Elias was thrown to the ground, pinned by cold metal claws. He struggled, breath tearing from his chest, until Cerise leaped across him, driving her blade through the drone's core. Sparks erupted, the machine collapsing lifeless beside him. For the second time, she had saved his life. Breathing ragged, Elias pushed himself up. Cerise didn't gloat, didn't sneer. She only held out her hand to steady him. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he took it. Her grip was firm, almost too strong, but it held him steady until he found his footing. The last drone fell, its core hissing into silence. The chamber quieted, though the monolith still pulsed with light. Elias and Cerise stood side by side, their weapons lowered, staring at the ancient machine that had awoken to their presence. The air between them shifted. For the first time since their crash, Elias no longer felt the weight of hatred pressing on him. He saw the scar along her cheek, the exhaustion in her stance, and realized she was no more a monster than he was. She was flesh and blood, trapped in a war as endless as his. Cerise noticed his gaze. For the briefest heartbeat, her expression softened, though she quickly masked it with steel. She turned away, but not before he caught the flicker of something unfamiliar in her eyes. They both understood now. The moon was not just a tomb of old battles. It was holding something far older, something waiting. And whatever it was, it had chosen them. Suspicion remained. Hatred smoldered. But with every clash of blade against machine, with every wound endured together, those walls cracked, and in the silence after the fight, as the monolith's glow bathed them both, Elias knew one thing with a certainty that unsettled him. Their survival would depend not on killing each other, but on learning to stand as more than enemies. And that possibility, that dangerous thought, felt heavier than the storm outside. The cavern had not been built by nature. Elias knew it in his bones as he followed Cerise deeper into the chamber, the glow of the monolith spilling soft light across their path. The air buzzed faintly, charged with static, and every surface seemed carved with meaning. Symbols wound across the walls like constellations, their lines sharp, yet strangely fluid. Elias reached toward one, brushing the grooves with his fingertips. The stone felt warm, pulsing faintly, as if alive. Cerise hissed at him in her tongue, a sound sharp with warning. He glanced back at her, catching the tension in her stance. She was afraid, though she hid it well. That alone told him everything. The Serati, proud and unyielding, did not show fear unless they could not contain it. The monolith pulsed again, light surging higher. The hum deepened, rolling through the cavern like thunder. Elias staggered as the resonance tore through his chest. It wasn't sound. It was something deeper, reaching into the marrow of his bones. He pressed his hand against the surface again, teeth clenched. The response was instant. Images burst behind his eyes, stars twisting into patterns, worlds locked in fire, and finally, silence. His breath caught. He tore his hand away, staggering back, sweat on his brow. Cerise stared at him, her golden eyes wide. Slowly, as though against her own instincts, she stepped forward and pressed her palm to the monolith. The light flared brighter. Elias shielded his eyes, but through the glare, he saw her body stiffen, as if caught in the same storm he had just endured. When she pulled away, her breathing was ragged, but her face was pale with something he had never thought he would see in her. The monolith did not react when either of them touched it alone. But when Elias, driven by instinct, lifted his hand again, and Cerise hesitantly mirrored him when human and Serati both pressed their palms to the same surface, the monolith roared to life. The cavern walls ignited, symbols burning with light. The hum became a voice. Not words, but something greater. It was as if the stone itself had ears, as if the stars themselves were listening. Elias looked at Cerise, breath catching. She looked back at him, her face lit in the glow. In that moment, there was no war, no past, no brother lost, no soldiers fallen, only two souls standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. Then the floor split open, the chamber shook violently. Dust raining from the ceiling. From the fissure below, more drones emerge, not rusted relics this time, but intact, sharper, alive in a way the others hadn't been. Their movements were precise, their limbs gleaming as if newly forged. The monolith's awakening had called them. Elias drew his knife, but the blade felt pitiful in his hand against machines like these. Cirrus bared her fangs, her curved sword raised, but even she hesitated at the sight of so many. The first drone lunged, claws extended. Elias dove, rolling across the floor, slashing at its leg. Sparks flew, but the machine barely faltered. Cirrus swept in with inhuman speed, her blade driving deep into the drone's chest. It convulsed and collapsed, but more poured from the rift. Their glowing eyes fixing on the intruders, they fought together. Back to back, blades flashing, bodies moving in sync without thought. He covered her blind side. She shielded him from a killing blow. At one point, a drone's claw grazed his ribs, drawing hot blood. He staggered, but Cirrus spun, her blade severing the drone's arm before it could finish him. It was chaos. And yet, amidst the chaos, something unspoken grew between them. Trust born not from choice, but from fire. At last, the final drone fell, its core hissing into silence. The cavern stilled. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping, his side burning from the wound. He pressed a hand to it, crimson seeping through his fingers. Cirrus knelt beside him. He tensed instinctively, but she reached for him not with a blade, but with her hands. She tore a strip from her armor and pressed it firmly against his wound. Her touch was firm, efficient, but not unkind. Their eyes met. For the first time, Elias saw her not as an enemy commander, but as a woman carrying the same scars of war as he did. And Cirrus, though silent, did not pull away. The monolith still pulsed, brighter now, as if satisfied. Its glow washed over them both, binding them in its strange light. Elias whispered, almost to himself, "It's listening." Cirrus tilted her head. She did not understand his words, yet somehow, she seemed to. Neither of them said more. The silence stretched, heavy, charged, not with hatred anymore, but with something else neither dared name. Above them, lightning split the sky, and deep within the moon's heart, the monolith continued to hum, waiting for what would come next. The cavern had gone quiet again, but the silence was no longer empty. It pulsed with something alive, something waiting. Elias leaned against the wall, his ribs burning from the wound. Cirrus tightened the makeshift bandage she had pressed against him, her claws grazing his skin. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. For the first time, her touch didn't feel like the threat of a blade, it felt like a choice. She met his eyes briefly, golden irises catching the glow of the monolith. And in that glance, there was no hatred, no orders, only a silent acknowledgement. The monolith's hum swelled, resonating with a low rhythm that seemed to mirror their breathing. The symbols carved along the walls flared brighter, spreading light through the chamber like veins of fire. The cavern floor trembled again, but this time it did not open with drones. Instead, the fissure beneath them exhaled light beams that rose like threads. Weaving into a shimmering sphere above the monolith, Elias pushed himself upright, pain slicing through him. "What is this?" His words were swallowed by the chamber's echo, but Cirrus seemed to understand the question anyway. She stepped closer, blade still in hand, but her expression had shifted. There was awe in it, and caution, and something like fear. The sphere shimmered, and then a voice filled the air. Not words, not language, a resonance. It was felt more than heard, vibrating in their bones, whispering in their minds. The sound shifted when Elias stood alone. It changed again when Cirrus moved closer, and when, after a moment's hesitation, they both stood together before the monolith. The resonance grew clear, balanced, whole, as though it had been waiting for them both. The realization chilled Elias. Whatever this structure was, it did not respond to one species alone. It needed two, human and Serati, enemy and enemy together. Cirrus spoke suddenly in her tongue, her voice low, almost like a confession. He could not understand the words, but her tone was softer than anything she had spoken since their crash. She gestured toward the light, then toward him. For the first time, her stance did not carry threat. It carried invitation. Elias hesitated. Every instinct told him not to trust her, not to lower his guard. Yet the memory of her saving him from the drones still burned in his chest. Slowly, he extended his hand, pressing his palm once more to the monolith's surface. Cerise mirrored him. The sphere flared. Images flooded their minds, not separate this time, but shared. They saw stars collapsing into fire, empires rising and falling, ancient voices declaring peace and unity, then watching as it crumbled into war. They saw other species long gone, their final creation left behind. This beacon, this voice of the stars, a failsafe that could only awaken when enemies chose something greater than hate. Elias staggered, overwhelmed. Sarah's hand shot out, steadying him. He almost laughed at the irony. The woman who would have slit his throat hours ago was now the only thing keeping him standing. But the vision was not finished. They saw fleets in orbit, human and Surati ships locked in their endless war. The beacon's light reached for them, waiting to be carried outward, waiting for a message to spread. Not of commands, but of unity. Then the vision broke. Elias gasped for air, chest heaving, sweat slick on his skin. Cerise pulled away, her own breaths sharp and ragged. For a long time, neither spoke. It was the distant crackle of static in Elia's earpiece that shattered the moment. He froze, raising a hand. Through the broken link came a voice garbled, but unmistakable. Human command. They had traced his signal. Rescue was coming. Cirrus stiffened as her own unit flickered to life. Guttural Surati commands spilling through. Both had been found. Both had been ordered. And the orders were clear, though neither needed a translation. Kill the other before we arrive. The cavern seemed to shrink around them, the monolith's light dimming under the weight of old loyalties. Elias' hand drifted to his knife. Cerise raised her blade. Their eyes locked. The air between them burned with tension, hatred, duty, survival, and something far more dangerous. He took a step closer. So did she. For a breath, it seemed the cavern would end in blood. But then Elias lowered his knife. Slowly, deliberately, he let it fall to the ground with a clatter that echoed louder than thunder. Cirrus' eyes narrowed. Her blade hovered in the air, her body taut with instinct. But after a long, unbearable silence, she, too, lowered her weapon. The hum of the monolith swelled again, as though the stars themselves had been waiting for that choice. Elias' voice was hoarse, quiet, but steady. We can't go back to what we were. She didn't understand the words, yet she understood him. The pause in her golden eyes was answer enough. Outside, fleets closed in. Inside, two enemies stood in defiance of everything they had been told. And in the heart of the cavern, the beacon glowed brighter, listening. The cavern felt alive with pressure, as though the walls themselves were listening to the silence between them. Elias could hear his own heartbeat, rough and unsteady, pounding against the faint hum of the monolith. Across from him, Cerise stood, as rigid as carved stone, her blade lowered, but her eyes never leaving him. Outside, the storm howled through the fissures of the moon. And above that storm came another sound, the faint rumble of ships breaking atmosphere. Rescue had come. But rescue meant chains. The comes in Elias' ear sputtered again. Static broke, followed by a cold, commanding voice. Ward, confirm status. Eliminate the Surati asset before recovery. The order slid like ice through his veins. His fingers twitched toward his knife, though he had already discarded it. He glanced at Cirrus. Her own cum crackled, sharp guttural words slicing through the chamber. She didn't translate, but she didn't need to. He knew. She had been given the same order. Kill him. Prove loyalty. Return home a weapon, not a traitor. Her blade lifted again, slowly, like the inevitable return of a tide. He met her eyes, refusing to look away. The air was so charged it felt like lightning could strike between them. But instead of lunging, Cirrus hesitated. The golden fire in her eyes flickered, not with weakness but with conflict, and in that fragile pause, the monolith reacted. Its hum deepened, symbols across the walls flaring as though answering their indecision. The chamber's light bent upward, spiraling into a beam that shot through the ceiling, carving straight into the sky. The ground quaked. Ash rained from above. In orbit, the fleet saw it, the signal, unmistakable, impossible. Elias staggered under the force of it, clutching his side, his wound burning. Cerise moved closer, instinctively bracing him before she even realized it. Her claws pressed into his arm not to harm, but to steady. Their bodies leaned into one another, as if the storm itself demanded they stand together or be crushed. The monolith's voice grew louder, not a sound, but a resonance, threading through every nerve. It whispered to them both, not in words, but in truths. Elias saw flashes again of himself, bloodied and tired, of Cerise standing alone on battlefields, her blade dripping, her eyes empty. He saw their mirrored scars, their mirrored grief, and then, impossibly, he saw them together, standing side by side, not as enemies, but as something unbroken. Cirrus gasped, staggering back as if the vision cut her. She hissed in her tongue, words desperate, as though denying what she had seen. Elias reached for her without thinking, his hand catching her wrist. She froze, trembling, her blade still in her other hand, but she did not pull away. Their eyes locked closer than they had ever been. The storm outside faded, become silenced under the monolith's roar, until the only sound was their ragged breathing. And in that moment, when duty and death pressed against them from all sides, something broke inside them both. Elias leaned forward. She didn't move back. Their foreheads touched, not quite a kiss, but something that carried the same weight. The storm within them shifted, turning sharp hatred into something even more dangerous, need. Then the cavern walls shook again, harder this time. A surge of energy rushed upward, bursting into the skies. The monolith was no longer whispering, it was shouting. The light reached the fleets above, pouring into their ships, flooding their coms with resonance. And every soldier, every captain, human and Serati alike, heard it not in language, but in feeling. A harmony born of two voices refusing to kill one another. Elias pulled back from Cerise breathless, his hand still gripping her wrist. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, but steady. If we do nothing, they'll tear us apart. But if we stand here, together, we change everything. Cerise didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. Slowly, she lowered her blade. For the first time, she let it fall fully from her grasp. The weapon clattering against the stone. Elias felt something in his chest shift when he saw it. The war had taught him to never trust, never hope. But here, in the heart of a dead moon, his enemy had just done what no ally ever dared disarm completely. The beam of light narrowed suddenly, shooting high into the void. In its wake, silence returned, oppressive and expectant. The fleets above were listening. The stars themselves seemed to be listening. Elias and Cerise stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons abandoned, their shadows cast together against the cavern wall. Neither knew what would come next. But in that silence, one truth had already been spoken. They had chosen each other over war. The silence that followed the beam's eruption was heavier than any battle Elias had ever fought. It was the silence of thousands of weapons stilled, of fleets waiting on the edge of destruction or deliverance. The cavern glowed faintly, the monolith's pulse now steady, as though it had spoken and was listening for an answer. Elias stood rigid, shoulder to shoulder with Cerise, their breaths loud in the stillness. His knife lay forgotten on the floor. Her curved blade glimmered where It had fallen. They were bare now, stripped of weapons, stripped of the roles their armies had carved into them. For the first time since the war began, they were only themselves, two soldiers, two souls. The comms crackled again. Ward, confirm kill. The human voice was sharp, insistent. But beneath it, Elias thought he heard doubt, hesitation carried through the static. At the same time, Cerise buzzed with guttural Sarati commands. Kill, prove loyalty, return. But when their fleets had seen the beam, something had shifted. Orders still came, but no fire fell from above. Suspicion froze the stars. For the first time, the endless war paused. Cerise stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing in the dim glow. She spoke in her tongue, words heavy with force. Elias couldn't understand them, but the way her voice echoed, the way she gestured toward the monolith and then to him, told him what she meant. This choice was not about their leaders, it was about them. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. He raised his voice, speaking into his come, not to obey, but to defy. I will not kill her. If you want me, you'll have to come down here and do it yourself. The chamber trembled at his words, as though the monolith fed on truth. Cerise. Expression shifted, first surprise, then something else. Respect. Perhaps even something deeper. The monolith flared again. The sphere of light reformed above them, larger, brighter, so brilliant, it lit the entire cavern like a rising sun. The resonance it carried was no longer a whisper. It was a roar that filled the air, spilling outward across the stars. And then, impossibly, the vision came again, but this time Elias knew it was not only in his mind. It was everywhere. Every ship in orbit, human and Sarati alike, saw it. Fleets paused in mid-battle as the stars painted them with light. They saw Elias and Cerise standing together before the monolith. They saw not blood, not blades, but unity. They saw the war from above, endless and empty, two species locked in a cycle that had consumed generations. And they saw a future, fragile but real, in which enemies chose not destruction, but survival together. The beacon was broadcasting, not commands, not lies, a truth born from the refusal of two soldiers to kill one another. The fleets faltered. Captains who had lost sons and daughters to war lowered their weapons. Warriors who had carried hatred in their hearts for years found themselves unable to fire. The silence spread, deeper and deeper, until even the void itself seemed to lean closer. Elias turned to Cerise. She met his gaze, and without words, without need for translation, they stepped closer until their hands touched not in battle, but in choice. Her claws curled gently round his fingers. His calloused palm pressed against hers. The monolith's roar became a symphony. The stars themselves seemed to vibrate with their unity, and above the moon, something impossible happened. The beacon's light drew lines between the fleets, stitching the void with glowing threads. They bent into gateways, arches of pure energy, connecting human space to Sarati space, linking their worlds through corridors of starlight. A gasp filled the coombs across both fleets. The message was undeniable. The beacon had bound them together. To destroy one meant to destroy the other. To unite meant to inherit the stars. Leaders shouted, commanders resisted, but the truth had already been spoken. Not in orders, but in sight. The soldiers in the fleets had seen it, and they chose silence over fire. In the cavern, Elias and Cerise stood hand in hand. Their shadows fused in the monolith's glow. He whispered, voice raw, "We didn't end the war. We gave them a choice." She didn't understand the words. Yet she leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his. In that small gesture, amidst the light of a dead world reborn, the meaning was clear. Above them, the fleets remained still. Across the galaxy, for the first time in generations, guns were silent. The stars had listened,